on what happens to the hundreds of thousands, literally, of businesses and employees across the country who work for a Main Street kind of business. If they all go away and there's not a really good way to get that group of people to succession, what happens? Consolidation happens. Cincinnati has formed a really cool coalition. It's a little like no, it's not like a chamber of commerce, but it was funded by the city of Cincinnati to actually just go out and promote to all of the retiring aged business owners that they could find, to educate them on all of the options for succeeding, which I thought was fantastic.
This is the Angel Next Door podcast, where we will talk about all things angel investing. What it is, who does it, how do we find them, what does it mean to invest in an early stage company? If you have ever wondered how you can affect the change you want to see in the world, then tune in to learn more. In this episode, I'm talking with Gina Schaefer about her fascinating journey from a visionary entrepreneur to embracing a unique exit strategy through an employee stock ownership program, or ESOP. And we do say ESOP several times in the episode, so that's what we're talking about, employee stock ownership program. Gina started her company in Washington, D.C., and she discusses the challenges and triumphs of expanding her hardware empire and the profound impact of transitioning to employee ownership. And we talk about the intricacies of ESOPs, the benefits for both the company founders and the employees, and why this model is gaining attention as a sustainable future for businesses. Tune in to explore how ESOPs can reshape the entrepreneurial landscape. Enjoy the show. Well, Gina, welcome to the Angel Next Door podcast. I am so excited that you're here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so we are going to talk about a very unique exit strategy and how you built your company and exited through an ESOP, an employee stock ownership program. So before we get into that, though, I just absolutely love hearing your story about how you got started, the business that you built. So give us the overview.
Sure. I'll try and do it in 2 minutes. I moved to a neighborhood in the middle of Washington, D.C. in, I guess it was 1998, that had been destroyed by the riots when Martin Luther King was assassinated. And I always told that part of my story, but when we go through the succession plan, I think it becomes even more important. The neighborhood had been destroyed, people had moved out, businesses were closed, houses were boarded up, and people started moving back because it was a cheap place to live. And I was 26, I think, when I moved into Logan Circle, 27, and a real estate agent said, "Sorry, it's the only place in DC you can afford." And I took her advice, ended up being one of the smartest women I had ever met, thankfully. And I moved into that neighborhood. My now husband, then boyfriend, got jealous. He moved into that neighborhood. We got actively involved in the community association. And you've probably heard me say this, but we liked to joke at that association that we lived in the dark, our toilet was always running, and our pictures were on the ground because there was no local hardware store. And all of us wanted everything that every other small community had, just like small towns across the country. We wanted a grocery store, we wanted a pharmacy, and we wanted a hardware store. And so we weren't getting the things that we needed to fix our houses because we didn't want to go to the suburbs. We didn't want to have to go far in DC. So we lived in the dark, basically. That was the joke. And I got laid off from my tech job. It was I don't know. I keep saying it was the third or fourth. You'd think this would be burned into my memory. But I was in the middle of the mid-90s boom and bust tech cycle, and I got laid off. And on that long drive home, I had a lousy commute. I thought, I'm going to be the one that opens the hardware store. And that was it.
Nice. Amazing. And then how many did it turn into? Because it wasn't just one hardware store, right?
Yeah. So Mark is my husband. He joined me about 3 months after I opened that first location. So we have, over the years, purchased 5 from existing owners. We've built 10 from scratch. And we've closed 2. So we currently have 13. We do have 1 in the works now, which is super exciting. I guess it's still a secret. So we'll have 14, I hope, by the end of 2025.
Wow. So what's it like to build one from scratch versus take one over? What were some of the challenges you had?
Good. It's a great question, actually, because you could ask, so Ace Hardware is a cooperative, for anybody who doesn't know that. We're not a national franchise, and there are probably 3,800-ish owners in the United States that own Ace Hardware stores, around 5,000 stores.
And explain what a cooperative is.
So a cooperative is a corporate entity that comes together for some sort of specific cooperative purpose for its members. And so in Ace's case, Ace started 100 years ago. There were 5 hardware store owners that started pulling their purchasing power to get better prices from the vendor. So I would say this, if I went to one of the big vendors, let's just say Black & Decker, I love them, but if I went to Black & Decker as Home Depot and I asked them for drills, they would give me one price. If I went to Black & Decker as Gina Schaefer, they would give me another price because I'm tiny. I'm a small local retailer. Ace, at its core, pulls together the buying power of all 5,000 stores to get us better pricing. And then the really cool thing about the ACE Cooperative and so many other co-ops actually is that there are all these other wraparound services. So they manage our e-commerce site. They do a lot of the online training, a lot of the in-person and online training. They bring us together for trade shows. They aggregate insurance.
Nice.
The way for independent retailers to really compete and have some strength in the competitive landscape, particularly in retail. It's helpful right now, but there are co-ops all over the world, and a lot of them in the United States that people have never heard of, like Cabot Creamery, Ocean Spray Cranberry, REI. There are a lot of cooperative housing units, cooperative grocery stores, and then there's some cooperative retailers like Ace.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah. So let's see. What was the question again? Oh, the difference? No.
The difference between building and buying.
Oh, yeah, building and buying. Thank you. So where I was originally going is that you could ask some of my colleagues or other store owners that I'm friends with, and they're going to give you a completely different answer. And so it really just depends on, I think, the store owner's personalities, what you can handle, what kind of store you're buying. We bought a store, for example, that had been a member of another cooperative, and that meant a whole new computer system. It meant a whole new inventory system. It meant getting rid of that store when we bought it was 94 years old, 95 years old. It meant getting rid of, I'm not lying, decades worth of old, bad inventory that just shouldn't have been there in the first place. So when you start fresh and it's ground up, the only things coming in your door they're good. They're the products that you want. The inventory is clean. You start out with a computer system that you know if you already have an existing store. So that's one of the challenges. Some of the other challenges that we've experienced over the years, integrating cultures is hard. I think the 5 stores that we bought, 4 in particular had very similar cultures. One didn't. But across the board, it's a new challenge. It's a new leadership structure. In some cases, it's a new set of rules. In all of the cases in the stores that we bought, pay went up because we were already paying more. Benefits increased because we had stronger benefits. But we still had that human element of making sure that the culture's aligned. When you start a new store, you take existing teammates. We always have existing teammates, and we move them to the new location. And the existing culture that we have gets a chance to grow the new team. So
Nice.
The biggest challenges or differences. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So you were running the show and running the company. Your husband was the CFO. You're the CEO. And how long did that go on before you decided, all right, I'm going to see how I can exit this opportunity?
I probably started thinking about it in 2017. So we opened the first store in 2003. The 14 years doesn't sound like a lot, but you probably understand the fact that when you start a business, you should already start thinking about your exit strategy. And that was the time that I thought, okay, we haven't really thought about this yet. And I know I'm not going to want to do this forever. So I would say around 2017, I just started kicking it around. What if I retire at 20 years? What if I retire at 25 years? What does that look like? And that took us to an incident in 2018, I believe. We were in Colorado, and the New Belgium Brewery at the time was an ESOP. And we were taking a tour of the brewery with a bunch of Ace retailers, and the tour guide, who was probably 22, was so incredibly enthusiastic, and she wanted to tell us all how she owned the brewery. This is really interesting. And we had heard of ESOPs before, and we tucked them in the back of our minds, but we really had no idea how they worked. And then we met this young woman, and we came back to DC after that trip, and we said, we're going to start our plan. And somehow we think this might be the pin. And then the pandemic hit. We'd started doing our research and learning more. And someone said, the employees don't put in any money when you form an ESOP. And that was really the kicker for us. Once we had that piece of information, we thought we can really do this. And then the pandemic happened, and hardware stores, fortunately, were super, super busy. So we were just in hyper sales mode for a couple of years until, I guess it was 2021, we really started We put the team together. We hired the outside consultant. We hired the trustee that we needed to hire. We started doing all of the financial work that we needed to do. And that started us on the final path.
So explain exactly what an ESOP is.
At its very basic, an ESOP works like a qualified retirement plan. So if you've ever had a 401k, most of us understand what a 401k, how it works. That's almost exactly how an ESOP works. When you join a company that is an ESOP, or when you worked for a company that announces it's going to be an ESOP, there's some rules that the sellers can put into place for eligibility. So our eligibility rules were you had to work for 1 year and 1,000 hours. So then you automatically become an owner. I think we said 18, and I'm sorry that I don't remember the number, but we did have an age requirement because we have so many high schoolers and college students that go in and out, and the paperwork just didn't make a lot of sense in 10 years. So then you're automatically an owner, and you get a portion of the ownership. So let me back up a second. When Mark and I sold the first piece, which was 30%, you sell it into a trust, and the trust is what owns the business on behalf of the employees. And you hire a trustee. I always call him the employee's person, but really he's the keeper of this trust that we've created. And the shares are held in the trust and proportionately divided into the employee's accounts. That's how it's held. Does that make sense? I believe me, it's taken me years to be able to even semi-articulate the whole thing because there's a little bit of complication and some nuances. And frankly, Mark did all of the transactional work. And so he's really familiar with it. When you work for an ESOP and you leave, you either retire, you quit, you're fired, you are no longer allowed by law to be an owner in the company. So we have to buy you out. So there is a 5-year, we can buy you out over 5 years if we want to make it smoother for the company. But then you would take that money like a 401k, hopefully, and roll it into some other kind of retirement plan in your next job, add it to what you're going to get, et cetera. And you only get valued once a year. So this is the other thing. In traditional publicly owned companies, stock goes up and down every day. In an ESOP, you get one valuation once a year. And that tells you for the whole year what your stock is worth in the company.
Got it. Okay. So at the beginning, it was you and Mark owned 100% of the company.
Right. Yeah, we never had any other investors. We've always had bank loans. We've banked with National Cooperative Bank. And so they've been our financial partner since 2005. I guess they gave us the loan for our second store and then all throughout our growth, but just Mark and I as actual owners.
So then when you decide that you're going to go to an ESOP model, you sold off a percentage, not the whole company, just a percent to the employees who were eligible to participate. Did everybody have to participate?
So you automatically become an owner. You don't have a choice. And to be honest, so we still have a 401k, but we stopped our match when we formed the ESOP. Just it made more sense financially for the company, but you automatically became an owner in the company. So the day we announced, it was, I think, August 29th, 2022. That should be burned into my brain. About 135 of our teammates were instantly qualified to be owners, which was really cool. And then in order for me to transition out, because part of this process was my exit strategy as the CEO, we purchased a store, merged with a store essentially from Fairfax, Virginia, and their store owner became our new CEO. I couldn't have asked for a better scenario. He was the perfect person for the job. Our cultures were aligned. We're in the same markets. And we were able to essentially backdate his team. So when they joined the company, the ones they weren't brand new or under 18, they automatically qualified to be owners also. So I thought that was a really cool way to bring them on board. Yeah.
So these 135 people that get to be owners, they didn't have to put in any money. Why is that? And how does that work?
So I always wish that I had a circle diagram that I could put up when I talk about this part. And then let's go back to the 30%. So since we didn't sell or talk about the wholesale. You can finance the sale of a business in a variety of ways. The business if we had the money in the bank, could have just paid Mark and I for that piece. We actually got a bank loan, which the business got, and then the business paid Mark and I because we didn't want to drain them of all of their capital. And so they paid us, and now the business is paying back that loan to buy us out. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So there was value in the company. So you took the loan against the value of the company. and then the company pays back the loan, but the employees who were eligible now own 30% of the company.
Yeah. So there's about 7,000 ESOPs nationally. I still think of us as unicorns because there's not enough. I was actually on a call last night with a woman who's trying to put together regional meetings of ESOP owners so that we can just talk about it more often, because people just don't even know it's an option for their exit strategy. And I've seen it happen in a couple different ways. If the business can finance it, either get the financing or self-finance, there are owners who sell 100% day one and either walk away, stay chair of the board, set up some of their management relationship, but 100% transfers to the team. We wanted to make sure that the business was still on solid financial footing, and there were rules that made sure that we did this anyway, and could still grow, meaning we weren't strapped with a lot of debt so that we couldn't open a new store this year and one next year, et cetera. So we decided we would probably sell it in 3 tranches. I keep saying it's probably going to be over a 10-year period. It might be accelerated. We're not sure yet, but I think we'll sell the next piece in 2026, mid 2026. And what that percentage will be remains to be seen.
So that could either come from cash that the business has, or the business could take out another loan against its valuation or against its own equity, essentially, in order to buy you out.
Yes.
Now, you and Mark did not have any outside investors, but if you had outside investors, they would have also had this opportunity to get cash back and exit.
Right.
Right.
They just like any other exit strategy that a business would have with any other kind of investor, they would have received their portion of the payout. Yeah. In fact, the store that we bought in Fairfax, as part of the transition to the new CEO, he has a very small ownership stake as an owner, as a non-employee owner. But as part of his contract, although we've never called it a contract, he has to also sell that percentage to the ESOP because we want it to be 100% employee owned. And so that would have been a deal killer if he had said, so his name's Craig. Craig grew up in the hardware business. He has been an owner himself of a hardware business for probably, 20 years at this point. And so we were essentially saying to him, hey, if you want this deal, you can't be an owner anymore. You're going to be an employee owner, which was important to me because I wanted it to be 100% employee owned, and he believes in it and agreed to it. And when the opportunity arises for his 8% or 10%, whatever it is, to be sold, it will be sold too.
Interesting. Now, say again how much an employee had to work there, how many hours before they were actually eligible?
For our plan, it's 1,000 hours and 1 year and 1,000 hours. So really, if you've been there for a year and you're a part-time employee, you could still be eligible. Which I think I think our 401k plan had the same basic eligibility rules. I don't think we had to tweak it much.
And so then as the company grows in valuation, you either add more stores, the stores grow, the economy gets better, whatever the story is, then that ownership that each employee has, will go up. And then as they either leave the company or retire, which is probably what you're hoping would happen, that they would stay with the company because they feel this ownership sense, and that then they would retire, then they have a stake of ownership. And you're saying that when that would happen, that it would be a mandatory selling of their share. So they would have to be bought out over a 5-year period. Is that right?
Yep, that's exactly. Yeah. Summed it up perfectly.
Awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
So I just think it's so fascinating because we're always talking in Angel World about how can companies exit. And in most cases, we only see acquisitions, a merger, something like that, some kind of a takeover of some sort where we would actually see some liquidity, or an initial public offering into the public markets, which is just happening less and less. It really didn't even happen much before then. But this is really an interesting way to look at it. So tell me a little bit about, how did the employees feel when they found out that this was going on?
I think the emotions and the understanding really ran the gamut. Anywhere from, I have a wonderful teammate who's worked with us for 22 years who wrote me an email the next day who said, I was panicked because I thought it meant you were leaving tomorrow. He immediately went to, this is Gina saying that she's gone. When in fact, I had put in about a 2-year succession planning step down for me, We had a teammate who I tend to think that everything's always rosy and perfect and everyone's going to love it. Nobody understands it, first of all. And
Right.
depending on your age and your work experience, you don't also understand a 401k. And it's hard to imagine any kind of liquidity event when you're 60, when you're 30, right? We've probably all been in that sort of scenario. So I did have a teammate who said, I own stock in Pepsi and no one calls me an owner. I feel like you're being I feel like you're patronizing me. And that's why
Mhm.
I was positive, because I was like, oh my gosh, that's such a negative. I would have never, but it was really good for me to hear that it's not an immediate wow for everybody who heard that we were going to do it. So what ends up happening, Marcia, is that we have somebody becomes an owner basically every day. If we hire people every day, which is not quite the case, but we have this rolling transition into ownership. So what that means for the team is that we constantly have to be educating ourselves and somebody new. And then, oh, by the way, why not continue to educate the rest of the team on what it actually means to be a part of an ESOP? The nuances, because it doesn't make any difference in your day-to-day paycheck. This was a big deal for us. So I mentioned the riots when we started the conversation. The full circle moment happened in 2021 when the protests across the United States started. And those protests in Washington, D.C. started at the same place that the riots that had destroyed my neighborhood started in the 60s.
Wow.
And they went right down in front of the office. And it was real. And this was like 3 or 4 times a week. This wasn't just a one and done kind of thing. And all of the protesters wanted things that we were already passionate about. They wanted us to talk about, or they wanted society, the United States, to talk about generational wealth building. Well, you do that when you work for an employer who's creating this retirement option. We don't have pensions anymore. So what does that look like for the average worker? And it's very different for retail workers because most retail employees don't have things like benefits and 401k opportunities. So the protesters wanted things like racial equality, gender equality, pay equality, a lot of things that we were already talking about in the stores. And so that was a real eye-opening moment for us. Like we are not just a small business owner. We are a member of a community and an employer that can actually, maybe at least in somebody's life, make some sort of long-term impact on their family. The challenge then, to go back to something that I said previously, is that if you are an hourly wage worker, and for us, that means you're probably starting at around $18 to $20 an hour and then benefits on top of it, that's not enough to live in an expensive city. It's not enough to grow a family in an expensive city. So we also know, as wonderful as it sounds, it's not going to be a path that a lot of our teammates are going to live. I want them to move on to higher paying jobs if and when they can. There are all these great stories about Publix supermarket in the South is the largest, I think it's the largest ESOP in the entire country. There are all these stories about their cashiers that retired as millionaires. And that's because they worked at Publix for 30 or 40 years as a cashier, and their stock just kept going up and up and up. But in my brain, I'm like, well, they lived where it was less expensive, or they were part of a married couple, or housing was cheaper. So it's not, I'd like to think that it's a solution to lots of things, but I don't think that's really the case.
Interesting. So if you and Mark, and if you had other investors, had just decided, hey, we're going to do the traditional exit model and we're going to have somebody else come in, we could have another big hardware store or maybe a family office or who knows, some kind of private equity, who knows, come in, your employees would have just been like, oh dear, new sheriff in town. And now we're going to have to go by their rules, integrate with their systems. And this could be really, and it could be good or it could be, who knows.
And we have lots of examples of when it's not.
But this is much different. So you are actually telling your employees, like, you will get to keep your paycheck just as it is. You do not have to put in any money yourself. And you will get a portion of ownership of the company as the company is sold back to the employees, and you and Mark in the next tranche are paid out, whatever that is. And let's say you sell back another 30%, then that means that's that much more that the employees will own.
Their value just goes up in that much bigger of a way.
Or their percent would go up, but if there was a loan against it, at the end of the day, it would all wash out.
Yeah, And as a brick and mortar retailer, I panic a little bit because I need brick and mortar to still be viable in the United States as a shopping option, because otherwise this value that we've created for our employee owners could go away. So I'd be lying if I didn't say that worried me at some point. But I wanted to just go back a second to something you said, because I know that you really get this. When we decided to form the ESOP, you have to hire a consultant, you have to hire an attorney, you have to hire a trustee. I used to joke that even my dog had an attorney, because there's a lot of hands in the pot to get this to the finish line, or at least to the announcement line. It was explained to us that had we sold to a private equity company, for example, now I know that there's stupid money out there, but had we sold for the actual valuation to a private equity company, we would have had to have asked for a 20% kicker because of the tax benefits that ESOPs enjoy.
Oh.
There are so many tax benefits for the company, for the sellers, for Mark and I, for the employees, that you don't get when you go through any kind of traditional sale. So setting it up was not inexpensive, but the longer term benefits are remarkable. So Mark and I, for example, every one of our stores was an LLC. We were told for years, make sure they're all individual LLCs for liability purposes. Well, when we decided that we were going to form the ESOP, they had to be one entity. And maybe we could have made 14 ESOPs, which just sounds like, oh God, I've never said it out loud. I hear you. I hear you guys roll. We formed a C Corp. So we rolled them all up into a C Corp so that we could take the 30% that we were paid out and put it into a 1042, which is a tax protected account for Mark and I. So we can't use it. We'll be taxed when we use it, but we don't need it right now. And so we were able to immediately put that 30% into this 1042. Once the business is 100% sold to the team, it will probably, or maybe it has to, become an S Corp. So there has been a little bit of a corporate also change trajectory. Yeah.
A corporate formation change. Interesting. Wow. So you mentioned something about liability. Obviously, each of the companies were LLCs for a long time until you put them into a C Corp. But was there any worry amongst the employees that they would then have liability for if something ever happened at one of the stores or happened to the company, or if the company was ever sued or something like that?
No, I don't remember anybody ever asking. It's a good question. I don't remember anyone ever asking. We obviously have great insurance as a retail business, and the bigger we got, the more we got, and we're in lots of physical plants or physical places. So no, I don't think so. There was, how am I going to make decisions? How is the ownership, or how is the management structure going to change? Not most, a lot of companies in the United States aren't run by the founder owner, but people have a very hard time conceiving what it would be like when Gina, who founded the company, was not also the CEO. And so that was, for our team, that was a little bit of a stretch. The cool thing about Craig coming on as CEO is that my leadership team had already worked with Craig, because cooperatively, the local ACE stores worked on lots of things together. We share marketing expenses. We meet once a quarter or more we bring in speakers. We train our teams together. And so he wasn't an unknown entity. They already worked with him, and I knew they already liked him. That was important.
That's good. Yeah, that's a really cool way to exit yourself. So why do you think more people aren't using ESOPs?
They don't know about it. They don't know it's an option. They haven't been given the sliver that we did, from whether it was from New Belgium or just me. I knew that I didn't want to sell it to a private equity company. Frankly, I knew that we had gotten big enough that it was going to be hard just to find a new owner off the street. So I think people just don't know. I was so the National Center for Employee Ownership is one of the big associations for ESOPs. And I go every year now. It's just a really good educational process for me. And I met a guy there. Most of the people who go already are part of an ESOP. I met a guy there who was thinking about forming it. And we were with, I can't remember her name, but it's regulated by the Department of Labor. And the Deputy Secretary of the Department of Labor was there speaking. And this guy said, well, he looks at me, my MBA and I, or my Wharton MBA and I, are going to speak to you after, because I don't believe you. Like in this room full of people with the deputy. But he was like, I was so frustrated, but he just didn't get it. He really thought that if he sold to PE, he was going to get more money. And I said to him, there's stupid money everywhere. Somebody might pay you more, but if it's not worth it, you can't count on that to happen. And I wasn't counting on somebody walking in saying, I'm going to buy your now $50 million mom and pop retail business and still run it the way you are. And so I think more people need to know about it. People who, like me, who are already part of an ESOP or have formed one, need to talk about it. I love the fact that you asked me to do this because you've got tentacles everywhere in the angel investing world and all these places who also haven't heard about it. And now you can say,
That's
hey,
right.
she'll tell you how it works.
Yes. And it
Yeah.
seems like the government is pretty interested in this too, if there are tax benefits. I know there's a lot of tax benefits for angel investors that we've talked about on the podcast before that a lot of people don't know about. And they were put in place because the government really does want to support small businesses.
Yeah.
And it's just a matter of knowing what all the rules are, because there are a lot of rules out there and different ways to do it.
Under the prior administration, there was a committees forming in every department or in every, at the Department of Labor and the Department of X and Y and Z. They were all starting to collaborate on what this means, particularly because you've probably talked about the silver tsunami, but so many business owners are retiring now. And what happens to the hundreds of thousands, literally, of businesses and employees across the country who work for a Main Street kind of business if they all go away and there's not a really good way to get that group of people to succession? What happens? Consolidation happens, job loss happens. Cincinnati has formed a really cool coalition. It's a little like it's not like a chamber of commerce, but it was funded by the city of Cincinnati to actually just go out and promote to all of the retiring aged business owners that they could find to educate them on all of the options for succeeding, which I thought was fantastic. Like, maybe you want to form a worker-owned cooperative. That's a whole other conversation. Maybe there is a local business owner that you don't know who would buy your business. Maybe you want to form an ESOP. And so there's pockets of this happening all over the country that I've been really heartened by, but we still need more people to talk about it.
Totally. Well, I'm so glad that you were able to come on to the Angel Next Door podcast and tell us all about it, because it's absolutely fascinating. And you're right, more people need to talk about it. So thank you, Gina.
Cool. I appreciate it. I think this might be the first podcast where I'd really just been able to talk about ESOPs. And I think that's so cool.
Nice. Love it.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. To connect with me, visit my website at marciadawood.com. And please subscribe, follow, and leave a review. It helps the podcast get seen by more people. And remember, you can also find the Angel Next Door podcast on YouTube too. And if you're looking to learn more about investing in the changes you want to see in the world, sign up for Ann and Bill Payne's ACA Angel University classes. Go to theangelcapitalassociation.org, all one word, to find out the schedule. And classes are now available on demand. Many classes are offered, everything from angel investing basics, which include fundamentals, risk, due diligence, term sheets, valuations, returns and portfolio strategy, and even a class on group formation. There's even a deeper dive where you can get advanced classes, including capitalization tables, startup boards, and exit strategies. If you're not already a member of the Angel Capital Association, you can become one for a low price that will give you unparalleled access to discounts, free webinars with a huge archive of content, networking opportunities, and much more. We'd love to have you join us. All content for this website is informational and not intended to serve as legal, tax, accounting, or investing advice. While Marcia, that's me, does serve on the SEC Small Business Capital Formation Advisory Committee, my views are my own and not the views of the SEC or my fellow colleagues on the committee. Our speakers and hosts are thoughtfully selected for their educational value, but their opinions are their own and do not necessarily represent the views of the host, me, or the Angel Capital Association, and neither specifically endorse the use of presenters' products or services. Listeners of the podcast should consult their own tax, investing, legal, or accounting advisors before making important financial decisions. All warranties, including accuracy, completeness, and suitability for specific purpose, are disclaimed.